Why did the laughter sting more than the desert sun? Morgan walked with her head low, the leather strap of her bag cutting into her shoulder as she joined the line of recruits. Around her, voices carried, bright, loud, confident. Some bragged about rifles polished to a mirror shine. Others compared new scopes that glinted in the early light, instruments so expensive they looked more like pieces of jewelry than tools of war. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her hand rested against the old spotting scope at her side, its metal cold even in the heat, its surface worn by decades of use. To most, it looked like junk, a relic. To her, it was something else entirely. But she didn't say that, not yet. The desert air smelled of dust and burnt powder, the kind that clung to your skin and throat. The range stretched before them like an unforgiving truth, targets scattered at distances that separated the amateurs from the real marksmen. Sergeant Collins barked instructions. His voice cut through chatter, sharp and unrelenting. Today you'll shoot, today you'll spot. You'll show whether you belong here or whether you don't. Recruits straightened, rifles clutched, boots shifted on gravel. Kept her eyes on the ground until the laughter came. Jake, son of a colonel, holder of a brand new scope his father had bought him for more than most families made in a month. He stared at its gear, then chuckled. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was the kind that drew blood. "You planning to fight World War II with that thing?" he sneered. "Looks like it belongs in a museum, or maybe a yard sale." The others joined in. Short bursts of mockery, snickers behind gloved hands. Even those who didn't laugh shifted away, as though standing near her would stain their own image. Said nothing. Her face burned, but her voice stayed inside, locked down like a secret she wasn't ready to tell. She prepared for this. She told herself not to care. But hearing the laughter, feeling eyes on her, she still felt small, smaller than she wanted to admit. Maria Santos shook her head as she adjusted her sleek, modern scope. "Girl," she said, not cruel but certain, "you need real equipment if you want to make it through. That thing probably doesn't even focus anymore." His fingers brushed the brass fittings. She knew better. She'd known better since she was 12 years old, since the day her grandfather placed it in her hands. "This scope will teach you," he'd told her then. "Not just to see, to read, to understand. Machines give you numbers, but numbers can lie. The earth never lies." The memory lingered like a whisper, one she kept buried while Sergeant Collins split them into pairs. Shooter, spotter, then switch. Her partner was David, quiet, precise, with the kind of posture that revealed years of military school training. His bag bulged with enough high-tech gear to outfit a small platoon. He looked at her scope, then at her. "If you want to borrow mine," he said softly, "I've got a backup." A kind offer, but not the right one. Shook her head. "Thanks, I'll use what I know." Hesitated, then let it go. He didn't press her, though his eyes betrayed doubt. The line of shooters took positions. The range cracked alive with rifles. Dust leapt from desert soil as bullets found, or missed, their marks. When knelt to spot for, she lowered herself behind the rusted scope, hands moving with practiced familiarity. To the others, it looked like stubbornness. To her, it was breathing, ritual, truth. The glass might be scratched, the body. But through it, the world came alive in ways no digital readout could ever capture. Heat shimmered off the ground, bending light in subtle waves. Grass blades bent just enough to betray the wind. Mirage danced on the horizon, whispering temperature shifts. Waited for her call. "Wind left," said quietly. "About 8 miles per hour, gusts coming irregular, aim a touch high." Skepticism flickered in his eyes. Still, he adjusted. The shot rang out. Metal sang on the far target, not dead center but on, exactly where the wind should have pushed. Frowned, he wanted perfection. But his second glance had carried something different, surprise. Respect, even if reluctant. "The wind reading was right," he admitted. "I didn't trust it enough." Didn't answer, she didn't need to. As the day wore on, distances grew. 200 meters, 400, 6. Each time, others relied on digital numbers flashing across crystal screens. Each time relied on the quiet language her grandfather had taught her: mirage, dust, wind, silence. And each time her calls were right. Whispers replaced laughter. Eyes that had mocked now watched, not openly, but the shift was there. Still, doubts lingered. When it was her turn to shoot, read data from his gleaming scope. 3.7 from the southeast, temperature 86.4, humidity 23. Computer recommends 2 mils right, .1 up. Nodded, adjusted, fired. The shot landed wide, a hollow clang off-center, wrong. She exhaled slowly. It didn't feel right. It hadn't from the moment she listened to the machine. Let me try again. Blinked, sure. She settled back, ignoring the numbers, ignoring the device, trusting the mirage, the rhythm of wind, the faint shift of dust across the desert. Her finger pressed, slow and steady. The rifle bucked. This time the target rang true, dead center. Turned, eyes wide. How did you? Sometimes instruments tell you what's happening now, said quietly, working the bolt. But they don't tell you what happens next. The words weren't hers, they were his, her grandfather, passed down like scripture. She thought of his weathered hands guiding hers, his voice steady in the Montana wilderness, of how he had made her clean the scope after every use, no matter how tired, teaching her that care and ritual mattered more than technology. Now, here on the range, surrounded by recruits with gear worth more than her family's truck, she proved it wasn't the metal that mattered. It was the mind behind it. Sergeant Collins noticed. His boots crunched the gravel as he stopped at her position, clipboard in hand. His face gave nothing away. "Morgan," he said evenly, "you disregarded the tech. Why?" She straightened. The heat beat down, but her voice held. Because the wind was shifting. Thermal activity was unstable. The numbers were right for a second, but the shot doesn't care about now. It cares about the moment it arrives. Silence stretched. Collins scribbled something on his clipboard. Then he nodded, moving on. Relief washed through her, though she didn't show it. Not here, not now. By late afternoon, the range smelled of sweat, powder, and exhaustion. The sun dipped low, stretching shadows across the sand. Targets grew farther, smaller, unforgiving. At 600 meters, recruits with shining gear missed entirely, their bullets vanishing into dust. Shots stayed true. The laughter was gone now. In its place, something heavier, unease, curiosity, a respect no one wanted to say out loud. During a break, approached again. No smirk this time, just a question. "How do you do it? That scope, it shouldn't even work." Paused, cleaning her rifle with steady hands. The truth pressed at her lips, but she held it back. Not yet. "My grandfather taught me," she said simply. "Nothing more, nothing less." He frowned, dissatisfied, but didn't push. The final test loomed. 800 meters, a shot that separated the good from the gifted. Felt the weight of eyes on her as she lay prone, rifle steady. Read numbers, his voice uncertain as wind danced unpredictable patterns. Through her scope, watched, waited, listened to the silence her grandfather had taught her to hear. The wind steadied, mirage slowed. Now, the trigger broke clean, the bullet arced into distance. A metallic clang echoed across the desert, dead center. The range fell silent. For a breath, no one spoke. And then footsteps, heavy, purposeful. "Captain," a man whispered about for his eye, for his reputation. He didn't speak at first. He only looked. At her rifle, at her, at the scope. And when his hand brushed the brass rim, his expression shifted, just slightly, enough. Something in his eyes froze, recognition. His breath caught, he'd seen it. Not the scratches, not the wear. The inscription. Numbers that meant nothing to the others, but to him, they meant everything. Why did the captain's hand linger on the brass rim? The recruits had fallen silent, eyes shifting between and the man whose reputation carried more weight than any rank on his shoulder. Captain was known for one thing above all else. He could spot talent long before it proved itself. And now, his gaze rested on her. Not on her rifle, not on her posture, on the rusted spotting scope she carried like a lifeline. The desert wind tugged at the captain's uniform as he turned it slowly in his hand. The metal caught the light, dull and yet alive with something only he seemed to recognize. His thumb brushed against the etching just below the eyepiece. Small, precise numbers that most would overlook. But not him, never him. For the first time that day, felt exposed, not by laughter but by silence. The captain's voice came low, measured. "Where did you get this?" The recruits leaned closer, curiosity burning. His heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to lie, to shrug, to dismiss it as surplus store junk, but the words wouldn't come. "It belonged to my grandfather, sir," she said finally. Her voice was steady, though inside she was trembling. The captain's eyes stayed on the scope, not on her, not yet. "Your grandfather," he repeated, as though tasting the word, weighing it against the truth he already suspected. "Yes, sir, he gave it to me when I was 12. His lips pressed into a thin line. He nodded once curtly, but the weight in his eyes deepened. Something unspoken passed through him, something that made the other recruits uneasy. When he handed the scope back, it wasn't the same gesture as before. Not dismissal, not ridicule, respect, reverence even. But he said nothing more. Not yet. The moment stretched. Then Sergeant Collins barked orders, snapping the tension like a whip. "Recruits, positions. We're not here for storytelling. We're here for scores." The spell broke, but the whispers began. "Did you see his face? What's on that thing? Why he cares so much about some old junk?" Ignored them. She forced her focus back onto the line, back onto the targets, but inside her mind ran like fire. Why had reacted that way? What exactly had he seen? She thought of her grandfather again. Frank Morgan, the man who taught her in the Montana woods, who spoke little of the past, who carried secrets like stones in his pockets. He'd always told her the scope carried stories, but never which ones. Never why he warned her not to brag, not to show it off. "Some truths," he had whispered once, "are too heavy to share." Now she wondered if those truths were finally catching up to her. At 400 meters, missed his mark again. He cursed under his breath, his expensive scope betraying him with data he didn't know how to use. At 500, Santos faltered, her confidence cracking as the desert mirage twisted her readings. But her shots cut through the distance clean. Her calls landed true. Each bullet carried not just practice, but the quiet teachings of a man who had drilled patience into her bones. And each hit tightened the recruits' circle around her, not physically but in attention. No one laughed now. No one dared. By late afternoon, sweat soaked her uniform, her muscles ached, yet her focus sharpened. At 800 meters, her final shot of the day had silenced the range. A perfect hit, the kind you didn't fake. When the recruits packed up, voices low and restless, remained. His boots crunched against gravel as he stepped toward her. "Morgan," he said simply. She froze back straight, eyes locked forward. "Yes, sir." He studied her face then, really studied it, searching for something, some resemblance, some truth. "Your grandfather's name." Her throat tightened. "Frank Morgan, sir." For a flicker of a second, something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, recognition. He nodded slowly, then softer. "And what did he tell you about his service?" The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy, dangerous. His chest tightened. She remembered her grandfather's evasions. Logistics, he always said. Supplies, paperwork, nothing special. He'd smiled when he said it, but his eyes had always looked far away. "He told me he worked in logistics during Afghanistan," she answered carefully. "Nothing dangerous, just moving supplies." Silence pressed harder than words. He didn't believe it. She could see it. He leaned closer, voice low so only she could hear. That scope of yours, it's no relic, it's a witness. And the numbers etched into it, they're not decoration, they're confirmation. Do you understand me? Her pulse roared in her ears. She didn't answer, couldn't. The captain's gaze lingered one moment longer before he pulled back, his tone formal again. Keep it safe, Morgan, and keep yourself safer. Then he turned and walked away, leaving standing alone in the heat, the whispers of her fellow recruits swirling like desert dust. What was etched into the scope? Why had it made a battle-hardened captain stop cold? And why did her grandfather never tell her? That night in the barracks, lay awake staring at the ceiling. Around her, recruits snored, muttered, shifted, but her eyes stayed open. The scope lay in its worn leather case by her cot, heavy, waiting. Her hand reached for it, traced the brass rim. She found the numbers she had never really questioned. 3 digits, then more, coordinates maybe, distances. Her heart thudded. If recognized them, then they weren't random, they were history. Her grandfather's whispered nightmares returned to her memory, nights when he'd woken in a cold sweat, muttering distances and numbers like prayers. She hadn't understood then. She wasn't sure she wanted to now. But one thing was certain. Her life at Fort Henderson had changed. She wasn't just another recruit anymore. The scope made sure of that. And in the silence of the night, realized something terrifying. Her grandfather's shadow was longer than she ever imagined. Why was she the only recruit still awake at dawn? The barracks were silent except for the low hum of air vents and the restless breaths of exhausted soldiers. But Morgan sat on the edge of her cot, boots laced, rifle cleaned, scope polished. The old brass glimmered faintly in the half-light creeping through the windows. Sleep hadn't come, not after his words, not after the way his voice dropped when he spoke of the numbers etched into her scope. A witness, he had called it. A witness to what? The question gnawed at her even now, her pulse quickening every time her thumb brushed the rim of the scope's eyepiece. Morning, Morgan. The voice startled her. David sat up from his bunk across the aisle, rubbing his eyes. He studied her for a long second before speaking again. You always up this early? She nodded, habit. Smirked faintly, though there was no mockery in it. Figures. Yesterday made it clear you're not like the rest of us. Stiffened, what do you mean? I mean you don't trust machines. You see things no one else does, and the captain noticed. She looked away, uncomfortable under the weight of the observation. Wasn't wrong, but she didn't want that kind of attention. Not yet. By the time the sun rose, the recruits were assembled again at the range. The desert wind was sharper this morning, cutting across the flat land like a blade. Sergeant Collins laid out the day's drill, moving targets. The laughter that had once targeted now shifted toward nervousness. Hitting a still target was one thing. A target that drifted, swayed, or retreated, that was another. Muttered something about algorithms and his scope's tracking system. Others nodded, clinging to their high-tech instruments like lifelines. Stayed quiet. She had only the voice of her grandfather echoing in her mind. Don't chase the target. Anticipate it. Find the rhythm before it moves. Her turn came after 3 recruits failed in a row. Shots cracked, targets swung and jerked, and their rounds found only empty desert. Stepped forward. She felt eyes on her from all directions, some waiting for her to fail, others waiting for her to prove them wrong. She dropped prone. The rusted scope pressed cold against her cheek. Through it the world steadied. The target shifted left, then right, swaying with the wind. But beneath the chaos there was rhythm. There was always rhythm. Her fingers settled, her breath stilled. The shot rang out. Metal sang on steel, dead center. The silence that followed was louder than the crack itself. Damn, whispered under his breath. Another shot, another hit. Groupings were tight, steady. By the time she rolled to her knees, even wasn't smirking anymore. Standing behind Collins, didn't clap, didn't smile. He simply watched. Later, during a break, approached, not mocking this time, genuinely curious. "That scope of yours," he said, lowering his voice. "What's the deal? It's different." Wiped sweat from her brow, her eyes stayed on the horizon. "It just takes practice." He frowned. "Practice doesn't etch numbers into brass." She froze. The words hit like a strike to the chest. He'd seen it. Maybe not clearly, but enough to know there was more. "Forget it," said quickly, misreading her silence. "Just saying, you shoot like someone who's done this before." Forced a thin smile, but inside, unease twisted deeper. By late afternoon, Collins gathered the recruits for evaluations. Each was scored on accuracy, adaptability, and composure. Knew she had done well, but when her name was called, there was no ceremony, no applause, just a curt nod and the faintest flicker of gaze. That night sat again with the scope in her hands. She tilted it, let light spill across the etching. She traced the numbers with her fingertip. They were coordinates, she was certain now. But to where? Her grandfather's face flashed in her memory. His voice, gruff but kind. The way he'd cut short her questions whenever the past came up. Logistics, he'd always said, nothing dangerous. But logistics didn't leave numbers like these carved in brass. Logistics didn't haunt a man's sleep with whispered distances and coordinates. The barracks buzzed with muted conversations, joked half-heartedly. Santos polished her rifle, scribbled notes in a pocket journal, but felt miles away. The scope wasn't just a tool, it was a key, and now the lock it fit into was beginning to turn. When lights went out, she lay awake again. Sleep refused her. Every creak of the building, every gust against the window felt heavy with unseen meaning. And then footsteps. Not recruits, not Collins. He walked the barracks aisle slowly, stopping at her bunk. For a moment she pretended to sleep, but when his shadow lingered, she opened her eyes. He didn't speak right away, just studied her face, then the case at her side. Finally his voice came low. "Keep that scope close, and Morgan, be ready. Some truths don't wait for permission." And then he walked on, his boots fatting into the night. Lay frozen, her heart racing. She knew then that whatever her grandfather had carried, whatever secrets he'd buried, were no longer hers to ignore. The desert wasn't just testing her aim anymore. It was testing her inheritance. Why was she the only one called forward? The recruits had just finished another grueling day of evaluations. Sweat soaked their uniforms and dust clung to their boots. Most expected dismissal back to the barracks, a brief moment of rest before another punishing cycle. But Sergeant Collins barked her name. Morgan, front and center. Heads turned, stepped forward, her pulse rising. Collins glanced at who stood a few paces behind, hands clasped behind his back. The captain gave a slight nod. "This one's yours," Collins said. His voice was calm but firm. "We're going long." A murmur rippled through the recruits. Long meant beyond 800, beyond 1,000, distances they hadn't been trained for. Whispered under his breath, "She's not ready for that." But's jaw tightened. She had to be. The walk to the firing line felt endless. The desert stretched before her, targets barely visible as pale squares in the distance. The wind had picked up, carrying grit that stung the eyes. Stopped beside her. His presence was steady, commanding. 1,200 meters, he said. Single shot, one chance. Gasps broke behind her. The recruits knew what that distance meant. At 1,200, even the best shooters faltered. Mirage warped the air, wind currents collided, gravity became merciless. A bullet's flight was seconds long, a plenty of time for the world to shift beneath it. Lay prone. The ground pressed hot against her ribs. She unpacked her grandfather's scope, its brass catching the last of the sun. Her hands shook just slightly, not from doubt, from the weight of eyes on her. Crouched beside her, "Tell me what you see." She pressed her eye to the glass. The target shimmered in the heat. The The wind swirled, inconsistent. Mirage waves bent like water across the sand. "Wind at my 9," she murmured. 7 miles, gusting 10. Mirage showing instability mid-range. His eyes narrowed, listening carefully. "Adjustments. Point 4 left, 2 mils high, wait for the lull." She inhaled, exhaled, waited. The desert breathed with her. The lull came, she squeezed. The rifle cracked. The bullet's journey stretched long, suspended in silence. His heart climbed into her throat. Then clang. The steel target rang out across the desert. Center hit. The recruits erupted. Some cursed in disbelief. Others shouted, voices echoing off the empty range. Didn't smile, didn't clap. He only studied her. "Again," he said. 2 more shots, 2 more hits, groupings tight enough to draw a line between. By the time she sat up, the recruits' faces told the story. No more laughter, no more whispers, only awe. Collins muttered something to himself, shaking his head, stared like he'd never seen a rifle before, gave her the faintest nod of pride. But he remained unreadable. When the others were dismissed, he kept her behind. "Walk with me, Morgan." The range was empty now, shadows lengthening as the sun dipped. Gravel crunched under their boots as they moved toward the far fence line. Silence stretched between them until finally spoke. "Your grandfather, did he ever tell you what he did in Afghanistan?" Hesitated. Her instinct was to repeat the old story. Logistics, supplies, but she remembered his eyes the night before, the way he'd called the scope a witness. Lying felt pointless now. "He never said much," she admitted, "just that it wasn't worth talking about." Nodded slowly. "Frank Morgan, Ghost." The name hit her like a strike to the chest. Ghost. She had heard whispers of that name once, in a late-night conversation between 2 veterans at a diner in her. They had spoken it with reverence, like it wasn't a man but a myth. A sniper whose shots stretched into stories too wild to believe. She had never connected it to her grandfather. Glanced at her, measuring her reaction. "That scope of yours, it was there. At a distance no one thought possible. The longest confirmed shot our forces ever recorded." Her breath caught. 3,000 meters, she whispered, the numbers etched into the brass. Nodded. 3,112. Afghanistan, remote mountains. He took the shot. It saved lives, changed everything. But it was never written into the books, classified, buried. Sneeze weakened. The desert swayed beneath her. Her grandfather, the quiet man who taught her in Montana, who carved wood by the fire, who laughed at her clumsy first attempts with a rifle. That same man had carried a name whispered like a legend. Ghost. His voice softened. "You carry more than his scope, Morgan. You carry his legacy, his instincts, his discipline, and whether you like it or not, people will notice." Swallowed hard. "Why tell me this now?" "Because your performance today wasn't luck. It wasn't even training. It was inheritance. And the military doesn't overlook inheritance like that." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. His eyes were sharp, unblinking. "You have a choice. You can hide it, pretend you're just another soldier, or you can accept it, step into it, and bear the weight that comes with it." Gripped the scope in her hands. The brass felt hot, heavy. Her grandfather's shadow loomed larger than ever. "Sir," she said quietly, "what if I'm not ready?" His expression shifted just barely, almost a smile. "No one ever is." He let the silence linger, then walked past her toward the barracks. His final words floated back on the wind. "Be ready, Morgan. The world doesn't wait for readiness." Stood alone in the twilight, the scope heavy at her side, her heart heavier still. She had thought this was just training, just the beginning of a career. But now it felt like destiny pressing in, as relentless as the desert sun. Why did the whispers follow her before she even set foot on the range? Fort Benning was different. Gone were the wide-eyed recruits fumbling with safety checks and nervously cracking jokes to mask inexperience. Here, soldiers carried themselves like steel. Uniforms pressed, rifles tuned to perfection, eyes sharp. These were marksmen, competitors, warriors. And somehow, Morgan, a girl from Montana with a rusted spotting scope, was now one of them. The Army Marksmanship Unit was more than a school. It was a proving ground, a crucible where the best trained against the best. Walls in the main building bore photographs of champions, records written in fractions of inches. The air hummed with discipline. Master Sergeant Helena met her at the gate. Weathered face, eyes like cold stone, voice that carried authority without ever needing to shout. "So," said, arms crossed, "you're Frank Morgan's granddaughter." "Froze, you knew him." "Worked with him once," replied flatly, leading her through the halls. Back then he was already a ghost, came in for a mission, disappeared again before anyone could ask questions. But his reputation, that stayed. His chest tightened. Hearing his name again, Ghost, from someone who'd been there, who had seen him in action, it made the shadow feel heavier. Stopped at a display case filled with trophies and rifles. She turned, eyes narrowing. "The question isn't whether you can shoot. We know you can. The question is whether you can carry his weight without it breaking you." Didn't answer. She wasn't sure she could. Her quarters were bare, metal bed, steel locker, one desk lamp. Spartan, as if to strip away distractions. She unpacked carefully. Folded uniforms, cleaned rifle, and last, the scope. She set it on the desk, brass fittings dull under fluorescent light. She stared at the etching. The numbers. Her fingers traced them again, the way she had so many nights at Fort Henderson. Now there was no denying it. Had confirmed the truth. Her grandfather had made the shot. The numbers weren't scratches, they were history. And she was expected to carry it forward. The next morning began with evaluations. Not warm-ups, not drills, an exam. The shooters gathered at the 1,000-meter line. Each had their gear laid out, cutting-edge rifles with advanced optics, computerized ballistic calculators, wind sensors clipped to uniforms. Setup looked primitive beside them, her grandfather's scope resting in its leather case like an antique in a museum. Yet no one mocked it here, not openly. Word had spread. Eyes lingered with curiosity, not laughter. Staff Sergeant Washington set up nearby, a competitor with a reputation carved in metals. He gave a polite nod but said nothing more. The first stage, 300 meters, targets broad, conditions steady. Everyone shot well, tight groups clustered on steel, no surprises. 600 meters, mirage shimmered, wind carried grit, some groups widened. Didn't. 800 meters, strange showed. A missed shot here, a muttered curse there. The breathing stayed steady, her grandfather's lessons guiding each pull of the trigger. Patience. The wind tells you when, don't force it. When her turn ended, her groupings were than most. Respectful glances followed her back to the line. But the real test waited at 1,200. The target was a pale square barely visible against the horizon. Even through scopes, it seemed to vanish into heat waves. The bullet would take nearly 2 seconds to arrive, 2 seconds where anything could go wrong. Washington went first. His rifle gleamed, his computer calculated. He fired. Steel sang but wide, off-center. Lay down. The ground radiated heat through her elbows. She pressed her eye to the old glass. Through it the world came alive. Mirage rippled like water. Wind danced in currents invisible to most. But she saw it. She always had. "Wind at 5, she whispered to herself. Shifting mid-range. Mirage rising 2 mils up. Her finger squeezed. The rifle kicked. Silence. Then clang, dead center. The line erupted, not in laughter, not even in disbelief, but in recognition. They knew what they had just seen. Washington approached, brows furrowed. He wasn't angry, just curious. "How did you call that? My data said steady winds. You adjusted for something else entirely." Hesitated, then tilted her scope toward him. Look, the mirage isn't flowing steady. See the waves, that means variable currents at different altitudes. Washington bent down, studied. His eyes widened slowly. I've been trusting numbers too much, he admitted. You're reading the earth itself. Before could respond, his voice cut through the air. Morgan with me. She followed the master sergeant to the edge of the range. His expression was unreadable. That shot, she said quietly. At 1200, few can make it. Fewer can explain it, but you didn't just shoot, you read it like your grandfather. Swallowed hard. I don't want to just be his shadow. Leaned closer, her voice low, sharp. Then stop acting like it's a burden. He gave you more than a scope. He gave you a language most will never learn. Use it or waste it. The choice is yours. His chest tightened. She thought of her grandfather's hands guiding hers, his voice in the Montana woods. The scope will teach you things no machine can. She wanted to believe it wasn't just inheritance, that it was hers too, earned. Studied her a moment longer, then turned away. You've proven yourself today, but the real test hasn't come yet. And when it does, you won't be shooting for scores. You'll be shooting for lives. A chill swept through despite the heat. The scope felt heavier than ever in her hands. How far could a bullet really fly before it belonged to legend? The instructors at Fort Benning called it the breaker. 1,500 meters. The distance that separated shooters from marksmen from masters. Few hit the target. Fewer still hit it well. The sun blazed overhead as the shooters lined up. Sweat-streaked brows, breath slowed, rifles rested heavy against mats. 1,500 wasn't a test of equipment alone. It was a test of patience, nerves, and the invisible war between air and metal. Washington took position first. His rifle was state-of-the-art, its computer humming as it processed wind speed, barometric pressure, even the curvature of the earth. He trusted it the way a drowning man trusted a rope. He fired. The bullet soared, seconds long in flight. It struck steel but wide, far from center. Washington cursed under his breath, disbelief flashing in his eyes. His system had promised certainty. Next was Sergeant, her posture flawless, her breathing mechanical. She fired. A miss. Dust plumed far beyond the target. One by one, the line faltered. Some hit wide, most missed altogether. The target mocked them, a pale square flickering through heat mirage. Then came. She stepped forward, rifle in hand, scope case swinging at her side. The recruits who once laughed at her now watched in silence. Even Washington, competitive pride still raw, looked on with something closer to respect than rivalry. She lay prone, pressing herself against the earth. She unpacked the rusted scope, its brass fittings catching the harsh light. To the others it looked like a relic. To her it was truth. Through the glass the world unfolded. Mirage bent the horizon. Dust spirals rose from unseen currents. The target danced at the edge of vision, impossibly small, yet steady in its rhythm. Her grandfather's voice whispered across memory, "Don't fight the wind. Listen to it. It speaks before it moves." "Wind at 2 o'clock, she murmured, not to anyone but to herself. 7 steady, 9 gusting, mirage rising mid-range, 1 mil right, 4 mils high. She breathed slow, steady, waited. The world hushed. She squeezed. The rifle cracked. The bullet arced into distance, invisible but alive, carving through air that shifted and fought to deflect it. Seconds stretched long, unbearable. Then steel sang. Not just a hit, center perfect. The silence that followed was electric. Every shooter, every instructor even froze. 1,500 meters, dead center. Broke it first, her voice low, tight with something between awe and command. Again. Chambered another round, waited, listened, fired. Another clang, another perfect mark. By the third, the range erupted. Not cheers, this wasn't a competition, but a rumble of recognition. They knew they had witnessed something rare. something that belonged to stories more than score sheets. Washington approached as she stood, rifle slung, scope tucked against her chest. His expression was stripped of pride. Only respect remained. "Your grandfather taught you well," he said quietly. Meta's eyes. "He didn't just teach me, he made me earn it." Before Washington could reply, stepped between them. Her gaze locked on, sharp as a blade. "That shot," she said, "do you understand what it means?" Swallowed. "That I can shoot far." Shook her head. "No, it means you carry something most can't. It means you'll never be just another soldier. From this point forward, people will measure you against him, against Ghost." The name hung heavy in the air. Some of the shooters nearby stiffened, recognizing it. Others whispered, uncertain but curious. His chest tightened. She hated it, the shadow, the expectation. Every shot she made felt like it tied her to a name she hadn't chosen. "I don't want to live in his shadow," she admitted, voice low. His eyes softened just slightly. "Then stop thinking of it as shadow. Think of it as torchlight. He carried it as far as he could. Now it's yours." Stared down at the scope in her hands. The brass felt hot, etched numbers pressing into her palm. 3112, her grandfather's distance, his legend. And now hers. That night in her quarters she tried to sleep, but the echoes of the range followed her. The clang of steel, the whispers of Ghost. The way had looked at her, not with doubt but with something more dangerous, expectation. She sat up, unable to rest. The scope sat on her desk, brass glinting faintly. She reached for it, fingers tracing the numbers again. For the first time she noticed something else. Beneath the original etching, faint, almost hidden new marks. Coordinates. Not her grandfather, hers. Her stomach dropped. Someone had inscribed today's shot, 1,500 meters, dead center. Legacy, recorded in brass. She stared at it until dawn, the weight of it pressing against her chest. She was no longer just carrying history. She was becoming it. Why was her name on a list she hadn't signed? The summons came at dawn. A knock on the door, two officers with clipped voices, an order to follow. Dressed quickly, boots tight, uniform still stiff with yesterday's sweat. The scope went into its case almost on instinct, her hand trembling as it fastened shut. They led her not to the range, not to the parade grounds, but to a concrete building tucked behind fences topped with razor wire. Inside, the air was cool, humming with fluorescent lights. Doors locked behind her as she walked. The briefing room was small, windowless, heavy with the smell of stale coffee. A projector flickered to life against a bare wall. At the head of the table sat Captain. He didn't greet her, didn't smile. He simply nodded at the chair across from him. "Sit." Lowered herself into the seat, pulse racing. Around her, a handful of officers leaned forward, their folders marked with red stripes, classified. His voice was steady, but his eyes carried weight. "You've been evaluated, scored, tested, and now, Morgan, you're being called for something real." The projector clicked, flashing images onto the wall. Grainy drone footage. A village nestled into desert hills, roads cut by ravines, then freeze frame. A body. Soldier, uniform torn, sprawled in dust. Another click, another image, a second body. The officers shifted uncomfortably, jaw tightened. "We're dealing with a hostile marksman," he said. "Unknown origin, unknown training, operating somewhere in this sector." He tapped a circle on the map. "He's already killed 3 of ours, 2 patrol leaders, 1 vehicle commander, always from distance, always clean shots." His chest tightened. She knew what that meant. This wasn't spray fire or luck. This was deliberate, precise. "A sniper. Intel believes he's dug into the hills here," continued, pointing. "Our units can't advance until he's neutralized. Standard counter-sniper protocols haven't worked. We've sent teams, they never came back." The room was heavy with silence. One of the officers finally spoke. "We need someone who can see further, someone who can read what our tech misses." His eyes shifted too. Her stomach dropped. Didn't look at her. He looked at the scope case on the table. You're being tasked for observation and counter-sniper support, effective immediately. His throat tightened. Sir, I've never. Cut her off. None of us have ever been ready the first time, but the battlefield doesn't wait for readiness. She stared at the images again. The bodies, the empty hills, the distances that turned men into shadows. Could she do it? On the range, the steel targets didn't bleed. They didn't scream. Out there, it wouldn't just be numbers etched into brass. It would be life and death carved into silence. One of the officers cleared his throat. You'll deploy with a small team. Secure perimeter, spot, identify, neutralize. This isn't optional, Morgan. You were selected for a reason. Her fingers tightened around the scope case. The brass inside felt heavier than ever, pressing down like a verdict. His gaze finally met hers. His voice lowered, almost private. This is where inheritance meets choice. You can walk away now, no one would blame you. Or you can step forward and carry the torch your grandfather left behind. His chest heaved. Fear, pride, doubt, determination, all collided in a storm she could barely name. She remembered nights in Montana, her grandfather's voice low, almost mournful. One day, you'll understand why silence weighs more than noise. Was this the day? She nodded slowly, firmly. I'll go. His expression didn't change, but his eyes softened just barely. Then pack light, he said. We leave at dusk. When she returned to her quarters, the others watched her in silence. They didn't ask questions they already knew. Whispers of Ghost's granddaughter had spread, but this was different. She wasn't just training anymore. She was being sent. Approached as she stuffed rations into her pack, his voice was low, almost reverent. You're the first from our class. Just come back, Morgan. She tried to smile. It didn't reach her eyes. The scope sat on the desk, waiting. She lifted it, traced the numbers again. Her grandfather's distance, her own etched beneath. Now another would join them, either his or hers. As the sun sank into desert horizon, she boarded the transport. Engines roared, dust billowed, and Fort Benning shrank behind her. Ahead lay hills where death watched through glass. Her first mission wasn't practice, it wasn't theory. It was survival. And as the scope pressed heavy against her chest, understood. She wasn't sent because she was ready. She was sent because no one else could go. Why was the desert so quiet tonight? The truck stopped miles short of the village. Engines died, headlights cut. The team moved on foot, shadows in the dusk, boots crunching against stone. Walked in the middle, rifle slung, scope case pressing against her ribs like a heartbeat. The hills loomed ahead, jagged against the fatting sky. Somewhere in that darkness, a man waited, a marksman who had already claimed 3 lives. Every step felt heavier. Training ranges had order, boundaries, instructors calling ceasefires. Out here, there was only silence, broken by the wind and the faint hum of insects. Walked point, steady, unshaken. Beside him, Sergeant scanned with binoculars. The rest of the team fanned out, rifles ready. His pulse hammered. She tried to breathe the way her grandfather had taught her, slow, even, patient. But her chest rose and fell too quickly, each inhale catching in her throat. They reached an outcropping overlooking the valley. The village lay below, lights flickering faint through windows, empty rooftops, too still. Knelt, this is where we set. The team spread out, finding cover among rocks. Unpacked the scope, hands steady now, ritual overriding fear. She mounted it, pressed her eye to the glass. The world sharpened. Hills layered like folded paper, dust swirling in tiny spirals, shadows stretching long. And something else. A glint faint, almost nothing but not nothing. Her breath caught. Counter-sniper, she whispered. His head snapped toward her. Where? She adjusted slightly, heart racing. Ridge, 2 o'clock, barely off the rocks he's dug in. The others scanned, their optics sweeping wide. None of them saw it, only her. The glint vanished. She knew what that meant. He had moved. His voice was low. "Morgan, you're on him." Froze. Her first real shot wouldn't be at steel. It would be at flesh. Her grandfather's words echoed. "The first time will haunt you, but better it haunts you than it buries your brothers." Her finger hovered over the trigger. Through the scope the ridge seemed endless. Every shadow a shape, every stone a silhouette. Then movement, barely a breath of it. The sniper was patient, skilled, waiting for them to reveal themselves. So she didn't reveal herself. She waited too. Minutes bled into more. The desert wind carried whispers, her eye burned from the glass, but she stayed, silent, still. Then a flicker, dust kicked, a barrel adjusting. Her heart stilled. She squeezed. The rifle cracked, silence stretched long, unbearable. Then a body crumpled against rock. The team exhaled as one. Relief, disbelief, awe, but didn't breathe. Through the scope she saw him, young, too young, his rifle slipping from his grasp, tumbling down stone. His hand twitched once, then stilled. Her chest heaved. She pulled away from the glass, the desert spinning around her. His hand settled on her shoulder, steady. "You saved lives tonight." But her mind replayed the moment, the flicker, the squeeze, the fall. Not triumph, not glory, just weight. They moved into the village, clearing homes, securing perimeters, but drifted in silence, the shot echoing inside her. Later, when the sun rose, she sat alone on the ridge where it had happened. The body was gone, carried away by medics, but the imprint remained. She pulled out the scope. The brass glinted in dawn's light. Her finger traced the new mark, fresh, etched into memory if not yet into metal. Joined her quietly, no words at first, just the two of them staring across endless sand. Finally he spoke. "You carry him now, just like you carry your grandfather. Every shot becomes a part of you. Don't run from it, don't bury it. Let it teach you." His throat tightened. "What if it breaks me?" His gaze stayed on the horizon. "Then you'll know you're human, and that's the only thing that keeps you from becoming a ghost." The words hung in the air, heavy, true. She lifted the scope one last time, pressed it to her eye. The desert stretched infinite. The mirage shimmered, bending the light. The world beyond the glass felt both distant and painfully close. For the first time, she didn't see her grandfather's shadow in it. She saw herself. Different, but standing. When she finally lowered it, her voice was steady. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. Glanced at her. "It simply acts," she finished. The captain gave the faintest nod. And as the desert sun rose, Morgan shouldered her rifle and walked back down the ridge, not as a recruit, not as a shadow, but as a soldier stepping into her own silence.